Today's podcast is going to be really impactful and important for anybody who is perhaps on the fertility journey or is somebody struggling with endometriosis. Today on the podcast, we have Kathryn Bregman with us. Kathryn Bregman is a master fertility coach mentored by Marianne Williamson. She works with women to remove blocks between them and their babies. Kathryn struggled for years to conceive her daughter, enduring miscarriages and failed IVFs before she discovered the power of reframing her thinking. That one change fostered numerous transformations and eventually led to natural conception against many odds at the age of 40. Her story is one that will make you laugh at times, that will make you feel inspired. We go so deep into her story of finding the right tools for her and the tools that she now uses to guide her clients into, I like to say, reclaiming their fertility by understanding the power of the mind and understanding how simple tools can really have the biggest impacts when we're on this journey and when we're on the journey of healing our body, regardless of the diagnosis. Welcome back. I am so excited that you have joined me again in the Aligned Womb, Aligned You podcast. I'm Kathryn and I, and I am your host and womb guide on this journey. I'm here to help you to lean into the language of your menstrual cycle so that you can align yourself and awaken and activate to your womb wisdom to live the most inspired life. I am so excited to jump into this episode and to dive into today's topic. So let's get started. Well, I'm excited to start this podcast episode, but to be honest, I am on my third day of bleeding, so my brain is moving very slow. Language is not my skill set today, but I'm still really excited to be here, and I am so excited to hold this space and to guide the conversation. But my bleeding brain right now is like, you know what? I'm going to let you guide the conversation somewhat here as well. So for anyone listening that's like, why does Kate sound off today? It's really, truly because I am bleeding and I'm giving myself permission to just feel a little absent in my ability to create structured sentences that sound well or so well put together. Like I can't even talk right now. So welcome, Kathryn. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
As so many people probably know, like I'm super passionate about fertility, mainly because that's what was the catalyst for all of this for me, right? This was what spurred my journey. This is what transformed my whole life. You know, I think a lot of us sometimes think that this fertility journey is really this journey where we just want to have a baby. But when we are forced on this path of having to reflect and look and analyze and go through the roller coaster of emotions and diagnoses and whatever else is thrown in our path for years upon years, it's inevitable that change has to happen. Like, I don't think you can come out the same person you went in on this journey.
Yeah. Oh my
And
gosh. Hearing you say that just gave me goosebumps because it's so true.
so true. I was
So true.
working in an office. Like, I was behind a desk typing, doing orders and customer service. Like I was in oil and gas. Like that, it just blows my mind of where I am now and how
Yeah.
aware I am of my body and who I am and the legacy I want to create for my daughters. And
Mhm.
I always think about my fertility journey as being, in a way, this beautiful gift that I can hold space for my daughters, regardless of what they go through, right? Like I think that it was divinely orchestrated that I was to have two girls after what I went through, because I can now normalize the experience of the ups and the downs of a fertility journey, whether you've been on it for 1 month or 6 years, right? It's difficult when you are deeply desiring something so badly and feeling like it's so out of your control.
Yeah.
So I just feel like the fertility journey, as much as it might be hard, or anyone that might be listening to this going, this sucks, it
Yeah.
does suck. You're right.
Yep.
It completely
It
sucks.
definitely sucks.
But you are going to be so different as you come out of this on the other side. So let's dive in. Tell me
Okay.
a little bit about your own story. What is your journey? How did you land in this
Ooh.
fertility world?
I love that question. Okay. So, Whew. So first of all, I will say I completely agree with everything you just said about the impact of the fertility journey on who you are and how you are such a different person when you come out of it than you were going into it. And I know that for myself and for the women who I coach in my program, the Badass Fertility Program, um, and as for you as well, like it's so hard to see this journey as a gift or an opportunity, right? Because like I was just writing an email yesterday and I was like, the only type of gift that you want this to be is the one that comes with a receipt that is returnable that you can like buy something else because like that's the only kind of gift
I
that
love it.
you want this to be. But it is not that kind of gift. It's a very different kind that is non-refundable in any way, until you learn how to navigate it. And so for myself, it's interesting because I love that you do um so much work with the cycle, like the menstrual cycle, because for myself going back, like I can see that my struggle to conceive really started in the painful periods that I had going all the way back to, my early or like say mid-teens. I don't know. I don't remember exactly when my painful period started, but I always always remember having really crampy periods. And I, was recommended to try birth control, right? Which, now we're all learning there's so many issues with that. I tried um taking birth control once or twice for cramps, right?
Mhm.
And I am very sensitive to hormones, like any artificial hormones that go into my body. And this came later to bite my ass when I was doing IVF because I couldn't handle so many of the hormones they would give me. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But when I first started with birth control, it just made me, just completely out of my mind, for even just after being on it for a month. So I couldn't do birth control. And I remember my gynecologist saying to me, like in my early 20s, well, the only way you can really deal with this is by getting pregnant. Just once you have a baby, your cramps will go away. I'm like, this is so not helpful, And so I always kind of felt like almost at war a bit with my body and kind of resentful and angry that I was going through this monthly cycle of pain. And then, because of the way that I am, the way that my life unfolded, I was always very career driven. I was very driven to like establish, all of the things in my life before I wanted to have a child. So, I got 2 advanced degrees. I worked at a university. I did all the things that I wanted to do. And then I met my husband, my future husband at 34, and we wound up getting married around 36 when I was 36. And I remember at that point in time thinking, oh my God, like I'm already behind the ball. Like I am like, I'm so old, quote unquote. I'm so late. And now, I'm 44 and I look back on that and I'm like, oh my God, you were so young. Like 36 is nothing, but I was so scared because that's the the party line, that we're fed growing up is like, oh, 35. Like that's a cutoff for God knows what, and I think we're finding more and more that that's so not true. But
It's funny that you talk about this because
yeah.
one thing I talk about with my clients all the time, and I said I always joke this, but one day I'm going to do this, is make a shirt that says "Smash the damn clock," because like, we are so taught that we are this ticking bomb that if we don't procreate in this small window and don't stress about it because I'm telling you that you only have this time frame, like I'm just
Yes.
this idea of putting in the women's heads about that they only have so many good years to birth children
Right.
puts so much stress on us. So I'm going to make a shirt.
Totally.
When I do, I will
No.
mail you one that says
Oh my
break the
God, I
damn
want
fast.
one. Absolutely. I want one for me. I want one for every woman in my program. Like we all need to wear this shirt.
Yes.
Because it's true. It's so true. And like I was so worried about the clock and that so my husband and I started trying to conceive right away, right? And he was worried about it too, we're the same age. And but I think he was more worried about it for me because of course all the pressure's on the woman and her age. There's no pressure on the men so much. Now that said, when we started trying to conceive just a few months in, I used an ovulation kit for the first time and I actually got pregnant. And I remember these are like famous last words because I remember saying to myself, just quietly in my head, why do people struggle to get pregnant? Just get an ovulation kit. Like I really
Yeah.
thought that. And then a few weeks later, I miscarried that pregnancy and I did not get pregnant again for almost 4 years. No matter how many fucking ovulations, sorry, I don't know if I can say that word
You can
on your
totally
show.
swear on here.
But
Totally
like,
swear.
okay. No matter how many ovulation kits I used, right? And I used God knows how many, hundreds, if not thousands, I don't know, kits, and did so many other things. So that really set me on this journey because when I miscarried, it was like all of my fears about my menstrual cycle, about my body not working properly, about all of these things just flooded me. And I felt like I had to do something about it right away. So I started doing acupuncture, which I was always a fan of. I had done acupuncture for other things. So it was a natural fit for me to say, okay, let me try and do it for fertility. Um, I started taking herbs. I started adding some supplements to my diet and was really kind of stressing about it. And I remember having friends who were like, just don't worry about it. Just don't even try. Just relax. And I was like, no, I just feel like there's something wrong. Like there's something in me that's wrong.
Mhm.
And in hindsight, I can look back on that and say, yeah, there was stuff that was wrong. Actually, I had endometriosis. I have endometriosis. I didn't know it because nobody had ever taken the time to properly diagnose me and pay attention to the symptoms that I was presenting for decades before I started trying to get pregnant. It was only when I started trying to get pregnant that all of a sudden now we're going to go in and we're going to start investigating and see what's going on. So we tried for a year using like acupuncture, herbs, timed intercourse, ovulation kit, paying attention to diet, trying to limit coffee, trying to limit alcohol, like trying to stay within those confines and then feeling like resentful of that because I'm like, my friends, they just go out, get drunk and get pregnant. But me, I can only have 2 glasses of wine a week, and it was like, so it felt like I was being punished even more. And so after a year of that, um, we decided to move on to IVF. We were advised, okay, now you've got to go to, get the real workup. So we did that. And my real workup was pretty devastating. They found that I had very low AMH. So they said, you're 37 now, but it's like you are 40 or whatever, so they scared me with age and the clock once again. I had elevated NK cells, which are the like extra white blood cells. So they said, if you did, have an embryo implant, your body might try to fight it off. Um, they said I had a thyroid condition, which I already knew. I was pre-diabetic, even though I'm like within my normal, weight range and all of that. And I'm a very healthy eater. Somehow I was pre-diabetic. Um, and there was one other thing the best one. I had what they called kinky fallopian tubes.
Okay. Pause. What are kinky fallopian tubes?
So kinky fallopian tubes, and I'm sorry, I know this story is long. I just, I'll try to stick to the highlights from here forward. But kinky fallopian tubes is definitely a highlight. It's basically they said that I had like endometrial tissue that had wrapped itself around my fallopian tubes and made them like kind of like a roller coaster, if you think about it like that. So it was really difficult for the egg and the sperm to meet. And it was very difficult for them, if they were to meet, to then get all the way to the uterus to implant. So they said that my risk of ectopic pregnancy was quite high. And if I was, to get pregnant at all. And so that was, the scariest factor for me. And that was what they said made them recommend that we skip IUI and go straight to IVF. It was like my age, which was only 37 at the time, maybe heading toward 38, right? But, and my kinky tubes. So, which is not a medical term, but it is, it is what they called it.
Love it. I
I
love it.
know. So So we, jumped into IVF right away, and we live in the United States, in the state of Florida, where we don't have any insurance coverage or anything for it. So it was completely out of pocket. Um, and that was, so it was a very big uh process for my husband and me to make this decision to decide to go ahead and do it. So we basically then entered into the IVF phase. We did 2 egg retrievals over the course of a couple of months, say maybe 3 or 4 months worth of time. During that time, we got about 3 or 4 embryos per retrieval, but we were advised to do genetic testing, and none of them tested um, well for the genetic testing. They all had abnormalities. So that was absolutely devastating, because it was, and I still honestly, I'm a big researcher. My background is in research. And so I was, of course, like very immersed in the research on genetic testing and embryos. And, everyone has to make their own choice, and everybody has to do what feels right for them. I think that we had such like fear of doing it wrong that we just did whatever the doctor said would be best. And in this case, I think back to those embryos, some of which through just microscopic observation were actually rated A's. Like I had one A that was then found to be, I don't remember what it was, but I want to say mosaic. It was something, and my clinic wouldn't transfer it. So it was very difficult for me to eventually even let go of those embryos. And I spent a long time considering trying to get them transferred to other clinics and see if another clinic would transfer it, because some will, some won't. At that point in time, I had already realized I needed support. So I had started seeing a therapist, and I was working with a fertility coach. And it was really the combination of those 2 things that helped me realize that I had to take a break. So I had signed up with my clinic, and they give you like a deal if you, sign up, you pay a lump sum. It was like $20,000. You pay this lump sum. You get 3 egg retrievals and 3 transfers in a year, right? So it's kind of like you get a discount if you buy this package. So I had done 2 egg retrievals. I had gotten no usable embryos. And I was only about 4 months in to this package at this time. And I was like, I had learned, honestly, from the fertility coach I was working with, not to live by the clock. Like she had really helped me see that I could save a bunch of time, right? I could advance, what's the word I'm looking for? Like exponentially, if I actually stopped for a little while. And I remember going through my mind and being like, I've done everything. But the one thing I feel like I've really been afraid to do that I haven't fully done is I haven't worked with a nutritionist. Like I've done a lot of my mind stuff. I've explored my childhood. I've explored past trauma. I've looked at these things that really matter, and I'll talk about those in a little bit. But I have been afraid to really commit to getting on board with a nutritionist. And so I said, okay, that's what I'm going to do next. And I think it's different for everyone. Like you have to look at the things that you're like, I was talking about this with someone else on my podcast the other day. And like, you have to look at the thing you're avoiding. Like, what's the thing you're the most afraid of? Because that's where your answers are, And so even though, because I was like, I'm a healthy eater, I eat really well. Like I'm good, but when it comes to fertility, and for me, like I had a lot of inflammation. I had a lot of stuff that when I shifted my diet and my nutrition, I like everything changed. I started doing this exercise called high intensity interval training, which a lot of people say is actually not good for fertility. But for me, because I needed to like shake things up in my body almost, because I was always just like, I'm yoga, I'll do yoga. Like I like yoga and walking, which is great. But like my body was like, you like yoga and walking, but you need to sweat, like you need to sweat. And I didn't want to sweat, but like, but I did. And I remember, so there's 2 things I'll say, and then I'm going to kind of get to the end of the journey. It's a long one, so I could go on forever. But I remember working with this trainer who I hired to help me, and I was going twice a week. And it was really a commitment. Like it took a major mindset shift for me to be open to doing that and to be committed to doing it. But I was like, come hell or high water, I'm having a baby. And I remember we were doing this really intense exercise where I had to like step up on a bench and step back down and step up and step down. And I had to do it like a bazillion times, like up and down and up and down, up and down. And I was like, just wanted to like crawl on the floor and die. And I remember thinking, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this thought came in my head: I'm going to be a mom. I'm going to be a mom. I'm going to be a mom. And I just kept saying that. And all of a sudden, it was like, I just picked up and my energy picked up and I just like started going, and I just started going and I like nailed it. And afterwards he looked at me and he goes, man, like, I don't know what happened, but out of nowhere, you just like took off. And I didn't tell him what I was saying to myself because I didn't want to share, but I was like, oh, I know what happened. Like I got my mind involved, I got my mind involved and my mind and my body connected and they started doing things that I can't do with just one or the other. So the last thing I'll share that was really like the linchpin in my pregnancy, and I'll get to what happened for me, is that because I had this diagnosis of endometriosis, which was never officially diagnosed because I didn't do the surgery to officially diagnose it. But we said, I have like 8 out of the 10 markers for it. So let's just assume you have it, kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
So there's an external physical therapy. There's a couple types out there that you can do to break up the tissues that were binding my kinky tubes. And I found this through my extensive research. And I was like, I just kind of knew intuitively, like this, I need this, like, this is me. Like this is what I need. And it was a very big commitment. It was like, you go for 5 days straight for like 6 hours a day to this place. So I had to completely clear like my entire work schedule, change everything. And this woman, Susan Winograd, who's amazing. And she has a podcast called, oh God, what's it called? It's like the pelvic core or something. I'll look and let you know, but she's amazing, Susan Winograd. And she worked on my abdomen and we released these tissues. We broke them down manually. And it's like external and internal pelvic physical therapy. And I released emotions that had been locked in those parts of my body for decades. And there was trauma even that came out that I had not fully processed. And it was the most life-changing experience I've ever had. And I got pregnant with a healthy baby girl the very next cycle, my very next cycle. And I had her at 40, despite the fact that I had had failed egg retrievals that had no genetically normal eggs. I figured it out. And I know that the reason I was able to figure it out is because I got my mind and my body connected,
Yeah.
So that's my story.
Wow. There's so many things that came to mind listening to you. The first thing I want to address is, and I don't even know if I want to address it. I just want to complain about it. But is, these, like, who made up these medical terms for women's bodies that really do not serve us? Like,
Yeah.
kinky tubes. I had an incompetent cervix. Like, how did that
Wow.
help me during my pregnancy to tell me that my cervix was incompetent? Like,
Yeah. Right.
or
Exactly.
failure to dilate. Like, you're a failure. You're not dilating. Like, these
Yes.
terms that we use, it's like,
Even
who?
infertility.
Yeah,
I hate that word. It's not even true.
yeah,
It's not even, I never use that word because it's like, that means you can't conceive. Most people who are struggling to conceive will conceive, you know,
exactly,
like,
exactly. I know the terms that we use are just, and I think that's a major disconnect in what we're seeing in the medical world and in this quest for a lot of women wanting to now begin to dive into alternative therapies and natural
yes,
healing, is that we are looking for language that supports us. We are looking for,
Yeah.
we're realizing the power of words, right? And,
Yeah.
you could go as far back as how this affects, like with affirmations or any of those things. Like language is power, right? Language
Yes.
holds meaning. Our body feels the vibration. Our mind
Mm.
imprints the felt sense behind the words that are used. There is no way that I felt safe in my body when I was told that I had an incompetent cervix, right?
Yeah.
Versus maybe trying to find different language to make me feel a little bit more safe and
Yes.
secure, and that
Yes.
the power was in my hands, the opportunity was in my hands for me to bend my health,
Right.
alter my health,
Right.
which I
Right.
did. Like, this is the
Right.
thing is like, I was told with my first pregnancy at 19 weeks that we were probably going to have a premature baby and that she
Oh,
might be born before she was viable. Like,
oh,
my cervix was incompetent, it was shrinking, and we needed to be alarmed. Um, I brought my cervix within 4 weeks back up to a normal zone.
wow.
So I had a thinning cervix, and then with weekly checkups, because that's how concerned they were, by I guess it was more than 4 weeks. It was probably 6 weeks because I was diagnosed at 19 weeks, told at 20. And then it was at week 26. They're like, oh, yeah, your cervix is in the normal range now. And of course,
Wow.
I messed that all up. I take full responsibility. My husband to this day, like I could hear his words in my head because I was like, see, all the stuff that I pulled all my resources from my fertility journey. I pulled my acupuncturist. I pulled everything that I knew that helped me conceive. I was like, this is not going to be my story. This baby is staying in. And I got it there at 26 weeks. And then I was like, see, I did it. And then I went back into my old habits of doing way too much, of hustling, of the day before my next appointment, after I knew my cervix was normal, I went and picked up bathroom tile for our bathroom and was carried in the house. Next appointment, my cervix went right down to like critical level. It was, but this just goes to show
Whoa.
like we have the power to create this alteration that, yes, diagnosis and medicine, it tells us so much. And I always say that, like, when we get this data, it's great. It's great because now we have data, we have answers. But that's not the outcome. Data is just
Right,
data.
right, 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 right. Exactly.
The
Data is not
outcome
outcomes.
outcome is what we do with that
I
data.
like that.
Yeah. And so,
Yeah. Yeah, that's so good. I'm writing
because
that
like,
down.
even when you think about your journey or my journey, like I was told I was having multiple ectopic pregnancies and I would never get pregnant naturally. That was data. I then said, screw that data. I'm going to create a new hypothesis and I am going to change how that looks, right? Same with my
Nice.
incompetent cervix, right? My daughter, without any cervical stitches or nothing, like nothing besides bed rest and taking it easy, because I got myself to a good spot. I pushed past my boundaries, put myself back in a critical spot. And then from 27, 28 weeks, I kept her until 38 weeks
Wow.
with nothing, with no other help. Right. And so,
Wow.
like, we have so much, and I'm not saying that's everybody's story, but I truly believe that we do have this power within us that when we tap into our willpower, when we tap into the things that we're avoiding, right? Mine was rest. Honestly, if we look at
Mm.
my incompetent cervix, it was rest, right? I rested, I got better, and then I was like, I'm going to keep pushing. And then
Right. I'm good
I ended
now.
up, and then I had to rest for like 2 months. So, but when we face those things, when we go deeper, that's when
Mhm.
healing happens. And we even see that in your story when you're talking about the the visceral manipulation or the manual therapy that you had on releasing, breaking down that tissue, that endometrium tissue that has grown outside where it needs to be, is that there was a flood of emotion, right?
Oh
And
yeah.
that, so much of healing sometimes is coming into a safe relationship
Mm.
with our traumas, with our emotions, the things that scare us, with the things that we're not even aware of. Like I heard you
Absolutely.
say about like that you worked through a lot of your stuff before your fertility journey, that you went and did like the mindset stuff. Part of me healing my fallopian tubes was just finding a womb healer that And that's exactly what she was. It wasn't that she did anything like, it wasn't a registered therapy. It wasn't something that my doctor would
Yeah.
have ever prescribed.
Right.
It was just somebody who said that they were a womb healer. And I was like, I'm willing to try anything.
Yeah.
But her hearing my story, she was able to reflect back elements of my story that I had never correlated as linking me to my fertility status.
Huh.
And it was amazing because I was born to teen parents. And her thing that she picked up from that was she was like, your fallopian tubes are immobile because you are so rigid because you came out of the womb saying, okay, guys, I got to fight to survive. Like there's two kids taking care of me right now.
Right.
Your chances
Right.
of
Right.
survival are on your shoulders, right? And my parents were amazing people, but they were young and maybe
Yeah.
didn't make always the best choices. But they were young and our house was filled with lots of love. My parents were together until the day my dad died. You know,
Mm.
I had a beautiful childhood, but I was perfectionist. I
Yeah.
was, as we've seen
Mm.
from my ectopic or my incompetent cervix, I was a pusher. I was like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna get shit done, right?
Yeah.
Like, and so this rigidness played so much into my fertility and my pregnancy. And it was so relieving of me going, you're right. I just need to relax. Like I need to trust. And that was hard
Yeah.
to trust.
It's very hard, when you're used to control and manipulation of a situation being the way that you trust it, So it's so much of the fertility journey, I think, for so many women, and it comes in different forms, but it's really about connecting with that inner knowing that we all
Mhm.
possess, that I believe every woman has, every person has, but women I think are even particularly good at connecting with it just by our
Mhm.
nature, and really learning how to hear that voice and follow it. And a
Yeah.
lot of the time it is telling us to do the things that we avoid, um because there's fear and the unknown in whatever it is that we're trying to avoid,
Mhm.
you know. Yeah.
And I'm assuming that you weren't a mind body coach. You weren't focused on mind body wellness at this time when you were trying to conceive. But
No,
it is now a super focus for you. This is what you do for a living now, is teaching women about the mind body connection and fertility. So how did that come
absolutely.
about? How has
Good
mind
question.
body
So, it's interesting because if you look at my past professional career and even like my interests growing up, there's this really cool like way that everything kind of converges and comes
Mhm.
to this point and makes sense, even though it's like I never would have thought that this would be where I was. Kind of like I was relating to you when you said you worked in a corporate desk job, and now you're in fertility. And
Yeah.
for me, I was in education for most of my career. So I started out actually teaching social studies, teaching history, and I loved it. And I always loved, like, for me, the thread really starts with my passion has always been to help people find that part within themselves that they know is there, but they haven't fully connected with, and help them bring it out to really become the best version of themselves, whatever that is. So that was like always like my underlying like secret intention with all of my students. It's like, I'm going to teach you history, and I think history is really important, and I'm like a big history nerd, but I also really want you to discover things within yourself and leave here feeling more connected to your own like internal greatness. And
Mhm.
now what I would define that when I work with my clients, I would call that more your inner knowing, your higher knowing. I want you to find that within yourself, that in your highest self is there, but we shy away from it. We turn away from it. We hide from our best selves for some reason, right?
Yeah.
Um and so it kind of makes sense because that's always been like my passion, is helping people discover that. usually without actually being explicit about it. But now, in coaching, it's obviously more explicit. So that was my career. And then I worked in higher education. I actually was um, a PhD student for about 5 years. I did a lot of research. I was a doctoral fellow at the University of Florida, total like overachiever, going above and beyond. Teaching wasn't enough for me. I had to go and be like the top best teacher of all teachers, and get my PhD. And I actually, though, interestingly enough, at the very end of that journey, I started to realize that I was like really unhappy and that I was looking at all of my professors and thinking, I don't want that job. I don't want that job. And I don't want that job. And I don't really like this, and I was realizing like that I was in it more. And I actually started at that point in time was the first time I ever started doing acupuncture. And it was the first time I ever started meditating. And it was those two things that I think really helped me see that I was very unhappy and that I was not going to get better once I finished my program. I was actually just going to be more stuck. And I remember I woke up one morning and it was like this big day where we were like making all these presentations of research that we had done. And it was like a big deal. And I should have been super excited and pumped and amped to go and do it. And I couldn't care less. Like I had to drag myself out of bed just to show up. And I knew that I was done. And I called my mom, who is also, who's a very big like self-starter. She raised 3 girls. My father passed away when I was young. And my mom raised all 3 of us and created her own company. And it was basically a tutoring center. So kind of education tends to run in my family. And I called her and she's like, come home, help me, run and grow this business. And I said, okay. And I left. I finished the semester. I took my EDS, which is like the fancy term for like a PhD dropout degree. And it's like,
Love it.
nobody knows what it means, but it actually signifies a shit ton of hard work and academic like integrity. But just not like the final step. And so I went home and I started working in the family business. And that was when I met my husband and we started trying to get pregnant. And long story short, I will add this because I think it relates back to the fertility journey. I also found that I really didn't like working in the family business. And towards the end of my fertility journey, I actually decided to leave and go back to teaching high school. Well, all the way, where I had started, 10 years before, I was like, I'm going to go back. And it was after I left the business and I went, which meant like a huge pay cut. It meant like a lot of, loss of different status and things. But I went back to like, I made that choice in April and by mid-May I was pregnant. And so I always think that like, that was also a really smart thing where I was following my inner knowing. I was listening to things that didn't always, and I tell this to my clients all the time, they don't always logically make sense, but they feel like the right thing to do. And I'm not talking about like, an impetuous feeling or like, just reacting to every feeling you have, but a deep inner knowing that is higher than our logical way of knowing things. When you can really connect with that and make decisions from that place, you are unstoppable.
Yeah.
So then after all of that, so then actually it was to finally answer your question during COVID, I decided not to go back to teaching because I live in the state of Florida and it was like a free for all. And I was like, I have a newborn baby. I'm not going into a classroom to be surrounded by kids and this thing that I don't even understand or have any idea, what it could do. Like we didn't know anything.
Yeah.
So I resigned. And then just one day it came to my head. I was like, I know how to educate. I know how to write curriculum. I know how to, teach and reach people. These are all like my greatest passions and skills. And I had a hell of a fertility journey. So I'm going to be a fertility coach. And then I actually like the universe supported me. And this opportunity to work with Marianne Williamson, like kind of just presented itself to me. I applied to work with her. I was accepted to work with her. And that began, my whatever it was, like 18 months of coaching, training to then become a fertility coach to kind of put that final piece together.
Right. Right. I love it. It's so funny because I also quit my job on my fertility journey. And it's so funny. Like I I hear what you're saying about like listening to that, like that deep inner knowing. It's like almost like a calling. It's not a question, it's like a calling. And you're
Yeah.
like, I just know this is the right best step for me to do. And it makes no sense to anybody in your
Right.
sphere. Like I
Right.
remember when I quit my job, HR called me into the office and they're like, "Do you have cancer or something?" Because no one quits from here. Like they did have like zero turnover for staff. Like
Wow.
it was an employee-owned company, so I had shares in the company, and they were like, nobody just decides to
Please.
quit. Like, are you
Yeah.
ill? Like, are you terminally ill? And I'm like, no, I just know that I have to do this for my health because otherwise I will become terminally ill. Like there was just this
Yeah.
knowing, right? And so, and I
Wow.
remember
That gave me
everyone,
goosebumps
I
to
know,
hear
and I
you
remember
say
so
that.
many people are just like, well, what are you going to do for work? And I'm like, I don't know. Because I really had no idea. Like I quit and was like, let's hope I have income. But I also
Yeah.
had like, I had my partner obviously at the time because we were trying. But it was, yeah, I remember people feeling like, what are you going to do? And I'm like, I'm educated. I've
Right.
held this job for several years. Like, I've got to be employable somewhere. I've got to find an option. And I didn't know what that looked like, but I knew what I was doing was so out of alignment with who I was as a person.
Wow.
Which was the
Yeah.
actually like when I think about it, that was the second rebellious, like I always call it radically defying your story, right? Like that was the second time that I radically defied my trajectory in the world. Because
Like that. Yeah.
like you, I
Yeah.
was in law school. I was going to be a lawyer.
Oh,
And now I
wow.
teach yoga and about the menstrual cycle. But like you, there was this moment. I remember I was in a class for human rights. It was the Charter of Human Rights. And I just looked, there was a part of me that went outside my body and scanned the room and seen all these people that were these cutthroat lawyers that they
Mm.
were going to do the thing. And I remember being like, I don't want this.
Yeah.
I want to
Yeah.
be a mom. Like I wanted to be a career mom. Like I
Yeah.
was somebody and I still do. I want to achieve. I love learning. Like I didn't want
Yeah.
to be a housewife, but I knew I wanted a family and I knew that I wanted to be a certain way in that family dynamic. I didn't want to
Yeah.
be absent for my kids' years. And looking around, I was like, this, what I see right here is asking me to become something I don't want to be. And so
Yeah.
I was like, I don't know what this means, but I'm changing over to a Bachelor of Arts. Like I'm just I'm throwing away some stuff here and I don't know where I'm gonna land. And but it all worked out. Like this is just it, is I think like when you trust that inner knowing, even if
Yeah.
you don't
Exactly.
understand the path, you don't have to.
Yeah.
My cousin always used this phrase. I remember this so clearly when I was quitting my job and everyone's like, what's going on? Was she said, sometimes you just have to jump and the bridge will form. You just have to trust
Yes.
the bridge will form.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I was like,
Absolutely.
well, I hope you're there, bridge or a hammock or anything. Maybe a river. Like I need something to
Mm-hmm.
catch me.
Mm-hmm.
But it did.
Mm-hmm.
Like and I carried that truth into my fertility journey as well, of just trusting even when it was scary, because we can trust and still be afraid.
That's a really good point. And I want to add to that, speaking of this idea of like inner knowing versus logical knowing and what makes the most quote unquote sense. Like for a lot of us, we're really raised and encouraged to be like go-getters, to use logic and reason and pro-con lists to make our choices. And that's how you end up in law school. And that's how I wound up
Yeah.
in my PhD program, because on paper, it all makes a lot of sense.
Hmm.
I remember when I decided to do that endometrial tissue manipulation, which is actually called clear passage. You can Google it if you're interested in learning more. It's called the Wern technique.
Oh
Um,
yes, I've heard of that.
Yeah, so that's what I used. That's what I did. Well, when I talked to my IVF doctor about it, I was I told him like I want to do this thing, because we were planning our next egg retrieval. We were going to do the third egg retrieval, and I was trying to figure out, should I do Warren before the egg retrieval or after the egg retrieval? And anyway, so I brought it up with my doctor, and he said, and I loved my IVF doctor. He was very thoughtful. He really, really gave us a lot of his time. He would sit with us for an hour and answer all of our questions. I mean, he was very thorough and, respectful, but he basically like laughed in my face. Like he was like, oh, no, 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 that is a waste of money. Like, do not do that. Like, they're just like, he literally said, like, they're trying to take your money. And in hindsight now, okay, I mean, nothing is cheap when you're doing fertility, but this was a hell of a lot cheaper, than IVF was. And like, and it worked. In combination with other things. I don't think that was the one thing, but I do think that it was a critical piece. And I remember leaving and saying to my husband, I don't care what he says, I'm doing it. And I think if that had happened to me a year earlier, I would have not done it.
Yeah.
I would have been, because his argument was there's no research, there's no data. It's not, and it actually, there is some research and there is some data, right? So it has been published in some peer reviewed scientific journals, but not in a lot of them, right? And he might argue it hasn't been documented well enough, quote unquote. But I knew intuitively, that it was right. And that's where, I think these practices of, I was taught by Marianne, like 5 minutes of breathing in the morning is what you need to connect yourself to your higher knowing, however you define that, whatever that means to you. And I really believe for everybody to do that, it really can change your life because you open that channel of connection and learn how to listen to something beyond just logic and reason.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think like when you look at anybody who outside of fertility, infertility that has had these big wins in life, it's because they just went with an instinct, right? There was
Yeah.
maybe no logical. Like I'm sure that Steve Jobs in the garage building the first phone or MacBook or whatever was his first development wasn't like, this is going to take the world. It was an idea. And
Yeah.
he knew that it was a really drastic idea, but he just trusted and jumped, right? And
Yeah.
I think that we see that so much is that when we go against the logic and we just really listen to the whispers, we sometimes know the next best step. And it doesn't always make the most sense.
Yeah.
And I always love when I have clients that are like, you know what? I don't know if this is the right time to join your program. I don't know, like I'm supposed to be doing all these other things. I should be saving or whatever the case may be, whatever their thing is. But then they're like, there's something in me that says now is the time. And they just do it.
Yeah.
And those are the
Yeah.
ones that get pregnant, right? Because it's like, and it's not my program. I always say this, I don't provide something that is like some kind of magical, I'm going to get you pregnant, right? It is that it's meeting your body where it needs to. I always call it like making your soup, right? Your fertility soup. There is
Wow.
1,000 different ingredients out there, but you need to
Right.
pick what feels right for you and throw that in your
Exactly.
pot. And then that is your
Yes.
medicine, right?
Yes. I love
And
that.
so it's like making your own fertility soup. And for some people, that's going to be acupuncture. It's going to be working with me and the nervous system. It's going to be yoga practices. For others, it's going to be relying on IVF because it feels safe. And that in itself, like if we look at the nervous system regulation isn't about being calm. It's about the nervous system registering in the body that it has choice. So
Hmm.
even if your medicine is IVF, if you're like, no, this is what feels good to me, it's because your body isn't going there to desperation. It's going there because I have a choice. I have this road or this road, but this feels like the right road, right? And I think that's when you see those people that are like, I got pregnant on the first round of IVF and they just knew it, like they knew it, right?
Mm.
And I think it's sometimes because we're doing things, at least that's what it felt like in my body. The more I
Yeah.
did things that felt like a knee-jerk response to fear was what kept me more in a state of disempowerment. And I remember, and I think that was the catalyst that changed me in that doctor's office that one day when they were like, let's just remove your fallopian tubes and let's not worry about it. Like you'll just go to IVF and you'll have one baby. That's the solution, right? And I remember in my gut saying, that is so disempowering. Like that does not make me feel good. And there has to be a better way. I didn't know what they'll look like, but there was this
Yeah.
part of me that just knew that that could not be the answer.
Yeah. And I think that's why the coaching aspect of fertility for women who are really struggling, like I was, like you were, is so valuable because when you're sitting in the doctor's office and they say to you, like in my case, you have to go straight to IVF, or in your
Mhm.
case, let's just remove your fallopian tubes.
Yeah.
And you have that visceral response of like, no, and it doesn't feel right. For another person, they might have been like, yes,
Yeah.
yes, that's scary, but yes,
Yeah.
but for you, it was no. And the conflict then becomes, well, I'm supposed to do what my doctor tells me to do.
Yeah.
Because if I'm a good girl and I listen to my doctor, I'll get pregnant. But if I rebel, right, or radically defy what the medical institution wants me to do, then I might be jeopardizing my chances. So
Yeah.
we take our power away from ourselves and we give it to the medical establishment, which can solve the problem for many women and can't solve it alone for many others. But
Yes.
they're not going to tell you, that's not a distinction they're going to make for you. That's a distinction you have to make for yourself. And that's where I think, what you're talking about with nervous system regulation and, connecting with yourself is so important. And, I just, I'm so glad that so many women are like speaking out about this and teaching other women about it. It's like a
Mhm.
lineage that we can start to create to pass down.
I
And
love that.
yeah,
I
it's
love
really,
that.
really
So on these
powerful.
on these calls, I always like to end with some kind of womb-led tip. For anybody that's listening to this, what kind of womb-led tip would you have if you're on the fertility journey or if you have endometriosis? Like what is your little piece of a nugget of advice that you want to give people today?
Okay, so let me just clarify. So a womb-led tip could be like anything that I would say to somebody who is ready to become a mom, but it hasn't happened yet, and
Yeah.
she's doing her best.
Yeah.
Okay. Honestly, I am going to say not everybody wants to hear this, but I'm going to say it anyway. And I said it earlier in the call too, but I'll say it again because I think it's so important. I really believe that taking even just 1 minute in the morning when you first wake up to sit down somewhere, close your eyes, and connect with your breath. And I could be more specific about that, but I'm not going to go into it in the womb led tip. But just
Yeah.
as a general statement, finding that moment, whether it's a minute or 2 minutes or 5 minutes, and making it a daily practice to the best of your ability. If daily is not attainable, 5 out of 7 days a week, right? But set your range and stick to it. You will find that this inner voice that we keep talking about that seems so vague and elusive and like what the fuck is that, is going to start to settle in. It's going to calm your nervous system, number one. Like you're just
Mhm.
going to physiologically start to respond to it, and that will help you start thinking more clearly and make better decisions because you won't be in fight or flight mode. And it's going to then help you listen more deeply to what truly makes sense for you. And that's going to be your compass to your baby.
I love it. I love it. That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Kathryn, for being on here today.
Welcome.
I could have talked all day with you about this
Me
stuff. Like, I
too.
feel like we need to be on a couch with a cup of tea and like just sharing all the things. So we might have to have you back here for round two because this was really, it was just such a, It's what my bleeding heart needed today.
Oh,
My
good.
bleeding uterus, my heart just needed today of just like this warm little conversation. It was so beautiful. So
Oh, I needed
thank
it
you
too. I
so
really did.
much.
You're
Mm.
welcome. Thank you for having me. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Friends, have you had a chance to download my new free ebook? Maybe it's not you. The Truth on PMS and How You Can Take Back Control of Your Cycle is now available. This is truly a book that I think needs to be in the hands of every woman who struggles with the second half of their menstrual cycle. So if this is you, click on the link in the show notes and download your free copy today. And remember to subscribe to this podcast and share a review if you loved this episode. Until next time, remember, womb wisdom equals connection to self, which ultimately equals inspired living.